The sky above the ruins of Japan was not a sky at all. It was a suffocating canopy of ash, crimson lightning, and the swirling, toxic dust of pulverized cities. It was the ceiling of a graveyard. Izuku Midoriya stood at the center of the devastation, though the word stood was a generous interpretation of his posture. His legs, shattered and reinforced only by the sheer, desperate manifestation of Black Whip acting as crude splints, trembled under his weight. His right arm hung uselessly at his side, the bones reduced to powder, the flesh mangled and bruised a horrifying shade of purple. His left arm was not much better, the heroic costume he wore, a patchwork of upgrades, memories, and his mother's love, burned away to reveal scarred, bloodied skin. Before him was the culmination of a century of hatred. Tamura Shigaraki, or the amalgamation of flesh and malice that All for One had molded him into, writhed upon the broken earth. The villain was a nightmare of regenerating tissue, grasping hands, and blinding, destructive power. But he was slowing down. The colossal, godlike entity was finally cracking. "Why won't you just break?" The voice of All for One roared, tearing through Shigaraki's vocal cords, producing a sound that was a sickening dual tone of arrogant rage and infantile desperation. Izuku didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. His lungs were punctured, every breath drawing an agonizing wheeze from his chest. He looked inward, past the physical pain, into the core of his soul where the power of One for All resided. The embers were almost gone. The roaring, torrential sun that had once been the quirk of the ninth holder was now a flickering, dying candlelight. The vestiges, Nana Shimura, Banjo, En, Shinomori, Bruce, and even Yoichi, had already expended their existences, launching themselves into the psychic maelstrom of Shigaraki's mind to tear All for One's hold apart from the inside. Izuku was alone. He was holding on to the absolute last drop of the stockpiled power, but as he looked at the monster thrashing before him, Izuku didn't see the demon lord of Kamino. Through the cracks of the decaying flesh, through the oppressive aura of decay, Izuku's emerald eyes caught a glimpse of a small boy, crying alone in a house of dust. Tenko Shimura, I have to save him. Even now. Especially now, because, Izuku finally wheezed, blood spilling over his lips, pooling on his ruined iron soles. He forced his head up, his eyes igniting with a verdant, terrifying brilliance that defied his broken body. Because keeping people safe is what heroes do. To generate the power needed to end this, to permanently shatter the twisted vestige of All for One without destroying Tenko's soul, Izuku knew what he had to do. The embers were not enough. He needed fuel, and the only fuel he had left was his own life force. His own future. He didn't hesitate. Izuku forced the remnants of One for All into his chest, directly into his own heart, bypassing the physical limitations of his mortal body. He felt the sickening, definitive snap of his own lifeline severing. He was burning his biological clock, converting his literal existence into kinetic energy. Golden light erupted from his broken form. It was not the chaotic, lightning-like discharge of full cowling. It was the serene, blinding, absolute pillar of light. Shigaraki recoiled, raising an amalgamation of arms to shield his eyes. No! Stop! You'll kill yourself, you foolish boy! All for One shrieked in genuine terror. Detroit. Izuku whispered. The air around him warped. Gravity seemed to invert. The rubble floating around them disintegrated into atoms under the sheer pressure of Izuku's aura. He pushed off his back foot. The earth beneath him cratered, sending a shockwave that cleared the ash from the sky for 10 miles in every direction. Izuku crossed the distance instantly. He looked into Shigaraki's eyes. In that fraction of a microsecond, the villain's face softened. The crimson gaze of All for One was washed away, replaced by the tear-filled, gray eyes of Tenko Shimura. Thank you, the boy's eyes seemed to say. Izuku smiled, tears streaming down his own bloody cheeks. Smash! Izuku's left fist connected dead center with Shigaraki's chest. The impact did not produce a sound. It was too loud for human ears to process, creating a vacuum of absolute silence that lasted for 3 agonizing seconds. And then, the world shattered. A dome of pure, unadulterated energy expanded outward. It wasn't a destructive force. It was a purifying one. The light washed over the ruined battlefield, dissolving the decaying matter, vaporizing the dark mass of All for One's quirks, and obliterating the monstrous form of the villain. Izuku felt the psychic tether snap. He felt All for One scream as his consciousness was erased from existence. He felt Tenko Shimura let out a sigh of relief as his soul, finally freed, drifted away into the ether. And then, Izuku felt gravity return. He collapsed. He didn't hit the ground hard. His body was too light. He felt hollowed out, as if he were made of dry leaves. He lay on his back, staring up at the sky. The ash had been completely cleared away by his final strike, revealing a beautiful, twilight canvas of deep purples and bright stars. He heard footsteps. Frantic, terrified footsteps. Deku! DKU! It was Kaken. The explosive blonde slid into the dirt beside him, his own body battered and bruised, his eyes wide with a terror Izuku had never seen before. Behind him, he could hear the frantic sobs of Uraraka, the heavy footfalls of Ida, and the exhausted gasps of Todoroki. Hey! Izuku mumbled. His voice was barely a whisper. He couldn't feel his limbs anymore. The cold was creeping up from his toes and fingers, a numbing, gentle tide. Don't you dare! Bakugo roared, grabbing Izuku's ruined collar, shaking him slightly before stopping, realizing how fragile the green-haired boy felt. Don't you close your eyes, you damn nerd! Recovery girl is coming. We won! You beat him! Just hold on. Uraraka fell to her knees on his other side, her hands hovering over his wounds, terrified to touch him. Tears carved tracks through the soot on her face. Deku, please, you promised, she sobbed, her voice breaking. Izuku tried to raise his hand to wipe her tears, but the limb wouldn't obey. I kept my promise, Uraraka, he whispered, a weak, genuine smile forming on his lips. Everyone is safe. He looked at Bakugo. We won. Kaken. Bakugo grit his teeth, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. Yeah. We won. You did it, you idiot. You're the #1 hero. So you have to stick around to claim the title, right? Izuku's vision began to tunnel. The edges of the world were turning gray. The pain was completely gone now. There was only a profound, heavy exhaustion. He had given everything. There was nothing left to give, and surprisingly, he was okay with that. He had done what he set out to do. He had saved them. I'm sorry. Izuku breathed out, his eyes fixing on the stars above. I'm so glad. I got to meet you all. Thank you, for everything. The green light faded from his eyes. His chest stopped moving. Izuku Midoriya, the 9th holder of One for All, closed his eyes for the last time. The boy who had been born quirkless had died as the greatest hero the world had ever known. It was dark. Izuku was aware of the darkness, which was strange. If he was dead, shouldn't he be unaware? He expected the afterlife to be a reunion. He expected to see Sir Naitai, or maybe the vestiges, or perhaps just an endless, peaceful sleep. Instead, he was floating in an abyss. There was no up, no down, no heat, no cold. He possessed no body, yet he retained a sense of self. He was just a point of consciousness adrift in an infinite ocean of nothingness. Am I a ghost? Izuku wondered, his thoughts echoing in the vast emptiness. Is this what happens when you burn away your life force? You just float? He felt a twinge of sadness. He missed his mom. He missed his friends. But alongside the sadness was a profound sense of peace. The heavy, crushing burden he had carried since the day All Might offered him a strand of hair was gone. The world was safe. I just wish I could have done more, Izuku thought softly to himself. There is always someone who needs saving. I wish I had the power to save everyone. Without hurting them. Without having to destroy anything. I wish I could have kept them all safe. Notice. Strong desire for salvation and protection confirmed. Unique skill. Savior has been successfully acquired. Izuku mentally jolted. What? Who said that? The voice lacked any gender, age, or emotion. It didn't echo from the void. It resonated directly within the core of his being. It sounded like the automated voice of an artificial intelligence, yet it carried an indescribable, divine weight. Was that a hallucination? Izuku's mind instantly began to race, his old habits dying hard. A voice responding to my thoughts? Is this a quirk from the afterlife? No, quirks are biological functions, and I don't have a body. Maybe it's a psychic remnant of the vestiges? Or maybe, his mind fired off a dozen theories a second, analyzing the tone, the vocabulary, and the implications of the voice. He mentally muttered a storm of hypotheses, cataloging the data of his own death and this bizarre post-death experience. Notice. Strong inclination toward rapid data processing, observation, and logical deduction confirmed. Unique skill, analyst has been successfully acquired. Acquired? Izuku thought, his phantom brow furrowing. Like a video game? Skills? What is happening? He tried to look inward, trying to feel for the familiar warmth of One for All. It was a reflex. Whenever he was scared or confused, he reached for that power. But as he reached into the depths of his soul, he found an empty cavern. The stockpiled energy, the quirks of his predecessors, the radiant sun, it was all gone. A profound wave of grief washed over him. One for All wasn't just a power, it was his connection to the people he admired. It was the legacy of heroes. And he had used it all up. It's gone. I really gave it all away, Izuku mourned. I don't regret it. I'd do it again. But, it was a part of me. The power that grew by being passed down, the energy we stockpiled together. I wish I could have held on to that feeling. The feeling of accumulating strength to protect others. Notice. Deep emotional attachment to the accumulation and release of energy confirmed. Attempting to recreate the phenomenon One for All within the boundaries of the physical laws of the cardinal world. Cardinal world? Izuku's confusion spiked. Failed. The concept of quirks is incompatible with the magical foundations of the cardinal world. Seeking alternative resolution. Resolution found. Translating the concept of accumulating energy and explosive kinetic release into the local magical system. Unique skill. Stockpile has been successfully acquired. Notice. The soul has stabilized. Body construction complete. Reincarnation process will now commence. Wait, reincarnation? Izuku screamed internally. Body construction? Cardinal world? Hold on a minute. I'm not ready. What about my mom? What about Yue? The emotionless voice did not reply. Instead, the infinite darkness of the void suddenly violently condensed. Izuku felt a sensation he hadn't experienced since he died, gravity, and it was pulling him down at blinding speed. A blinding, kaleidoscopic tunnel of light swallowed him whole. He felt a sudden, sharp intake of air, the burning sensation of oxygen hitting lungs that hadn't been used. Izuku gasped, his eyes flying open. He shot up from a prone position, coughing violently. His hands immediately flew to his chest, clawing at the fabric there. He expected to find a gaping wound, charred flesh, and the sticky warmth of his own blood. Instead, he felt coarse, simple fabric. He felt the steady, strong rhythm of a perfectly healthy heartbeat thumping against his ribs. He stopped coughing and froze. He looked down at his hands. They were his hands, undeniably. He recognized the shape of his fingers, the faint freckles on his wrists. But something was horribly, impossibly wrong. The scars were gone. The jagged, lightning-shaped surgical scars that traced his right arm, the permanent discoloration from multiple shattering breaks, the gnarled knuckles, they were completely erased. His skin was smooth, unblemished, and healthy. He patted his face. His cheeks were rounder. He felt younger. He looked down at his legs. The black whip splints were gone, and his legs felt springy and full of life. He was wearing a simple tunic made of a rough, brownish material, and loose-fitting trousers that stopped at his calves. He was barefoot. I'm alive? Izuku whispered aloud. His voice sounded a bit higher, lacking the slight rasp he had developed during the final war. He sounded exactly like he did when he was 14 years old, just before he met All Might. He scrambled to his feet. He was in a forest, and not just any forest. The trees around him were impossibly massive, their trunks as wide as houses, their canopies stretching so high they blocked out most of the sunlight, leaving the forest floor bathed in a luminescent, emerald twilight. The flora was bizarre. Glowing blue moss clung to the roots, and massive, carnivorous-looking flowers pulse rhythmically in the underbrush. But it wasn't just the sights that were alien. It was the air itself. Izuku took a breath. The air felt heavy. It tingled in his lungs and on his skin, like static electricity before a thunderstorm. It was invigorating, almost intoxicating, but deeply unnatural to his human senses. Where am I? Izuku muttered, spinning in a circle. Did Kurogiri warp me? No, Kurogiri is gone. And this environment, it doesn't match any known ecosystem in Japan, or anywhere on Earth. The atmospheric density is completely different. The vegetation exhibits bioluminescence usually reserved for deep-sea environments. He began to pace, his thumb flying to his mouth, the familiar habit of his muttering taking over, and my body. The cellular regeneration required to heal my arms is beyond Recovery Girl's capabilities. It would take a localized time reversal quirk, like Ares. But I don't feel the after-effects of Rewind. Furthermore, I vividly remember dying. My heart stopped. So if I died, and now I'm in a strange forest in a younger, unblemished body. He paused, staring blankly at a glowing blue fern. Did I get ice-guyed? Izuku blinked. He was a teenager in the 22nd century. He knew what anime and manga were. He had read plenty of fantasy comics before the villain attacks made real life too chaotic to keep up with hobbies. But the idea that it was actually happening to him was absurd. Wait. The voice in the dark. Izuku closed his eyes, concentrating. Voice? Are you there? Silence. It mentioned skills. Savior, analyst, and stockpile. If this is a fantasy world scenario, then those are my abilities. Suddenly, a massive migraine pierced Izuku's forehead. He stumbled, clutching his temples. Notice. Unique skill, analyst is activating. Thought acceleration has been initiated. Analytical appraisal has been initiated. The world seemed to shudder, and then, everything slowed down. The dust motes, floating in the beams of sunlight, ground to a near halt. Izuku's mind was suddenly plunged into an icy, crystal-clear state of hyperfocus. His panic vanished, replaced by an objective, terrifyingly fast stream of calculations. He looked at the glowing blue moss. Appraisal result, Magisteel moss. A common plant in areas with high ambient magicule density. Can be used for basic medicinal poultices or low-grade magical reagents. The information didn't appear as text, it just blossomed in his mind, as if he had always known it. Magicules. Izuku breathed out, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. That's what this heavy feeling is. Magical energy. He looked at his own hands. Appraisal result, Izuku Midoriya. Species, human, otherworlder. Age, 14, physical reconstruction. Threat level unknown. Magicule capacity, abnormal. Otherworlder, Izuku confirmed aloud. The reality of the situation crashed over him, but thanks to thought acceleration, he didn't panic. He processed the grief, the shock, and the acceptance in a matter of seconds. He was in another world. He had died, saved his own world, and was given a second chance in this one. A sudden, sharp snap of a twig broke him from his reverie. Izuku spun around, dropping into a defensive stance out of pure muscle memory. From the dense shadows of the underbrush, pairs of glowing, malevolent yellow eyes appeared. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the damp earth. 3 creatures stepped into the dappled sunlight. They looked like wolves, but they were monstrously large, easily the size of small horses. Their fur was a matted, dark olive, and a ridge of jagged bone protruded from their spines. Their maws were unhinged, dripping corrosive-looking saliva onto the grass. Appraisal result, direwolves. Rank C. A vicious pack-hunting monster. Highly aggressive. Recommended action, evade or terminate. Izuku swallowed hard. They were monsters. Real, actual monsters. The lead direwolf snarled, scraping its massive claws against the dirt, preparing to charge. Okay, think, Izuku whispered. He was back in his 14-year-old body. He didn't have his support gear. He didn't have his iron saws. And, most terrifyingly, he didn't have one for all. Wait. The voice said it failed to recreate one for all, but gave me stockpile instead. It said it translated the concept to magicules. The lead direwolf lunged. It cleared the 20 feet between them in a single bound, its massive jaws snapping open to tear Izuku's head off. Izuku's reflexes, honed by fighting gods and monsters in his previous life, kicked in. Time was still crawling due to his analyst's skill. He analyzed the wolf's trajectory, the muscle tension in its legs, the angle of its jaws. "I need power!" Izuku commanded himself. He reached inward, feeling for that unique skill. Stockpile. Activating unique skill, stockpile. Drawing upon ambient and internal magicules. Izuku didn't feel the familiar, crackling warmth of the sun in his stomach. Instead, he felt something cold, ancient, and boundlessly deep open up within his chest. The heavy, tingling air of the forest suddenly rushed toward him, swirling into his body like water down a drain. His veins, normally invisible beneath his unscarred skin, suddenly bulged and glowed with a brilliant, luminescent green energy. It wasn't the lightning of full cowling, it was a dense, liquid aura that coated his skin. He didn't have time to master it. He had to act. Izuku shifted his weight, dodging by a hair's breadth under the lunging direwolf. He raised his right hand, extending his middle finger and thumb. It was the first move he ever truly made his own. "Let's see what this energy can do." Izuku flicked his finger. Delaware. Smash! He released the stockpiled magicules in a localized burst at the tip of his finger. The result was catastrophic. A shockwave of highly compressed, emerald magicules erupted from his hand. It didn't just push the air, it tore reality asunder. The concussive blast slammed into the airborne direwolf. The monster didn't even have time to yelp. The sheer kinetic force of the magically enhanced air pressure instantly pulverized the creature, blowing it backward with the force of a bomb. The shockwave didn't stop there. It carried on, tearing a trench through the earth, uprooting massive trees, and clearing a path of destruction 50 yards long before dissipating into the forest canopy. The deafening boom echoed through the great Jura forest, sending flocks of giant, alien birds scattering into the sky. Izuku stood frozen, his hands still extended. He looked at his middle finger. It wasn't broken. It wasn't purple. It was perfectly fine. The remaining 2 direwolves stared at the trench, then at the small, green-haired human boy. The predatory hunger in their eyes instantly vanished, replaced by primal terror. They tucked their tails between their legs and bolted into the undergrowth, whining in fear. Izuku slowly lowered his hand. The green aura faded from his skin, his heart hammered against his ribs. The power was immense. It felt similar to One for All, yet distinctly different. It didn't shatter his bones because it wasn't raw physical strength tearing his muscles apart. It was magical energy channeling through his body, acting as a medium for kinetic force. He looked at the destruction he had caused. The crater, the pulverized trees. I'm really in another world, Izuku muttered, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across his face despite the shock. He gripped his right hand into a fist, feeling the absolute perfection of his healthy joints. He had died. He had completed his mission. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done with Izuku Midoriya. Unique skills. Magicules. Monsters. Izuku took a deep breath of the heavy, magical air. He looked up at the slivers of sky visible through the giant canopy. He didn't know what this world was. He didn't know the rules, the politics, or the dangers. But as he stood there, a young boy with the soul of a veteran hero, one thing remained absolutely certain. Wherever there were people who needed saving. "All right," Izuku said, adjusting his rough tunic and stepping forward into the lush, unknown forest. "Let's figure this out. Time to start from zero." The Emerald Hero took his first step into the great Jura forest, entirely unaware of the chaos his simple existence was about to bring to the cardinal world. Survival, Izuku quickly discovered, was an entirely different beast when you didn't have a convenience store down the street, and the local wildlife viewed you as a mid-afternoon snack. 3 weeks had passed since he had woken up in the great Jura forest. In that time, the initial shock of reincarnation had settled into a quiet, focused determination. Izuku Midoriya was not a stranger to hard work. Before he ever possessed a quirk, he had spent 10 months cleaning a beach composed entirely of multi-ton industrial trash just for the chance to be a hero. He knew how to grind. He knew how to endure. But this world demanded a different kind of endurance. Izuku sat cross-legged on the thick, mossy branch of a colossal ancient oak tree. His makeshift shelter, a woven hammock of sturdy vines and broad, waxy leaves, hung securely above him, hidden by the dense, emerald canopy. Below, the forest floor was a shadowy labyrinth of towering roots and glowing flora. He was currently holding a strange, spiky purple fruit in his hand. He closed his eyes and activated his skill, Analyst. Instantly, the familiar, comforting chill of thought acceleration washed over his mind. The ambient sounds of the forest, the distant, guttural roars, the chirping of massive insects, the rustle of leaves, slowed to a crawl. In his mind's eye, a stream of data blossomed. Appraisal result: venom spike melon. Flora. Contains trace amounts of paralyzing toxins in the outer skin. The inner flesh is highly nutritious and rich in water. Recommended preparation: peel carefully without puncturing the inner membrane. Izuku opened his eyes, a small smile playing on his lips. Fascinating, he muttered, drawing a crude bone knife he had fashioned from the remains of a deceased monster he'd scavenged a few days prior. Carefully, he began to peel the spiky purple rind. The evolutionary biology of this world leans heavily into magical deterrence. The toxin isn't meant to kill, just to paralyze small herbivores so the plant can absorb their decomposing nutrients. It's like a passive, localized acid quirk. He took a bite of the pale, glowing flesh inside. It tasted remarkably like a cross between a watermelon and a pear. As he ate, he closed his eyes and retreated into his mind. Before, he had carried dozens of physical, burnt, waterlogged notebooks titled Hero Analysis for the Future. Now, thanks to Analyst, he didn't need paper. He had constructed a massive, perfectly organized mental library. He walked through the virtual doors of his mind, stepping up to a podium. There, a pristine, glowing green book rested. Magical World Heroics Analysis for the Future, Volume 1. He mentally logged the entry for the venom spike melon under the foraging flora section. Then, he flipped to the section that occupied most of his waking thoughts, magicules and mechanics. Okay, let's review the data, Izuku mumbled aloud, a habit he couldn't break, and frankly, didn't want to. Magicules are the fundamental building blocks of phenomena in this world. They are in the air, the water, the soil, and within living beings. In my old world, quirks were biological mutations, physical appendages or genetic anomalies. But magicules respond to will. They are influenced by the soul and the mind. He held up his free hand. He closed his eyes and called upon his other unique skill, stockpile. He didn't draw upon the ambient magicules around him, terrified of accidentally launching another Delaware smash that would level half the forest. Instead, he looked inward, locating the deep, cool reservoir within his own soul. He drew a fraction of that energy out. His skin began to emit a soft, pulsing green glow. When I used one for all, Izuku analyzed, watching the green energy dance across his knuckles, I had to picture an egg in the microwave so I wouldn't blow my limbs off. It was a physical exertion of stockpiled kinetic force. But this is different. It's fluid. In the first week, Izuku had nearly blown his arm off again trying to punch a boulder. He had treated the magicules like raw strength. But Analyst had quickly corrected him. Magicules weren't just blunt force, they were a medium. He took a deep breath, picturing the pathways of his veins, his arteries, the very nervous system of his body. If magicules respond to will, then I don't need to force them to be a hammer. I can weave them like armor. Like a current. He focused his intent. He didn't just want power, he wanted control. He wanted the energy to flow continuously, wrapping around his muscles, reinforcing his bones, enhancing his reflexes. He wanted his old fighting style back. 5%, Izuku thought. Let's start with 5% of my internal capacity. The green glow on his hand suddenly spiked. It spread rapidly up his arm, across his chest, and surged down to his legs. The soft glow intensified into brilliant, crackling streams of emerald energy. It looked exactly like the bioelectricity that used to arc off him in his old world, but this wasn't electricity. It was pure, dense magical aura, dyed the color of his soul. Yes. Izuku gasped, his eyes wide with excitement. The power thrummed in his veins. He didn't feel the terrifying, bone-crushing pressure of one for all. He felt light. He felt unbelievably fast. He stood up on the branch. Magicule cowling, 5%. He looked across the gap between his tree and the next, a distance of at least 40 feet. Before he died, without a quirk, he couldn't make that jump. With one for all, he would have shattered the branch he leaped from. He bent his knees. He didn't overthink it. He just moved. Izuku kicked off. The branch beneath him groaned but held firm. He shot through the air like a green bullet, the wind roaring in his ears. The feeling of weightlessness, the absolute freedom of the sky, it brought stinging tears to his eyes. He landed gracefully on the trunk of the opposite tree, his bare feet gripping the rough bark as he absorbed the impact perfectly, his reinforced muscles handling the kinetic shock with ease. He didn't stop. He began to bounce from trunk to trunk, ascending higher into the canopy. 10%. He thought, pushing the flow. The green aura flared brighter. His speed doubled. He became a blur of emerald light darting through the ancient woods. He found a massive, dead tree trunk standing alone in a clearing. He twisted his body mid-air, bringing his right leg around, shoot style, his heel connected with the dead wood. The reinforced magicules around his leg acted as a battering ram. The trunk exploded into a shower of splinters, the top half sheer sliced off by the sheer magical kinetic force of his kick. Izuku landed softly in the tall grass, his breathing slightly elevated, the green sparks slowly fading from his skin. He looked down at his legs. They didn't ache. His bones weren't throbbing. He fell to his knees in the grass, pressing his hands into the dirt, and let out a shaky breath that turned into a quiet, joyful laugh. "It works," he whispered, wiping a stray tear from his cheek. "I have it back. No. It's better. I'm not destroying myself anymore." For the first time since his reincarnation, Izuku felt fully equipped. He was in an unknown world, surrounded by monsters, but he had his mind, he had his body, and he had a power he could finally control. He was ready to be a hero again. A week later, Izuku was patrolling. He had mapped out a roughly 10-mile radius around his base camp tree. He used his time to practice keeping Magicule Cowling active at a constant 8%, treating it as a background function of his body to build his stamina. He was currently crouching in a patch of tall, fern-like plants, observing a herd of Armosaurus, massive, triceratops-like beasts covered in thick, metallic scales. He was busy cataloging their herd behavior when a sudden, jarring sensation ripped through his chest. It wasn't physical pain. It was a profound, suffocating spike of anxiety, followed by a cold shiver down his spine. Notice. Unique skill. Savior has detected extreme malicious intent and mortal danger directed at defenseless entities within a 2-mile radius. Direction northeast. Izuku didn't hesitate. He didn't question the voice or the skill. The moment the word defenseless entered his mind, his body moved on its own. It was the same instinct that had launched him into the sludge villain to save Kaken. Magicule Cowling, 15%. Izuku commanded. The green lightning erupted around him, far denser and brighter than before. He exploded out of the brush, leaving a crater in his wake. He tore through the forest at terrifying speeds, weaving around massive tree trunks, vaulting over exposed roots, his eyes locked dead ahead. The passive alarm of Savior beat in his chest like a second heart, growing louder and more frantic the closer he got. He could feel it now, a sickly, cloying aura of malice. He burst through a thick thicket of thorny bushes and slid to a halt on the edge of a small, rocky ravine. Down in the ravine, backed against the sheer rock wall, were 5 small figures. They were humanoid, but their skin was a pale, sickly green. They wore ragged, oversized loincloths and carried completely useless, broken sticks. They were children. Goblin children. They were trembling, weeping, and clutching each other in absolute terror. Looming over them was a nightmare. It was an arachne, but not the romanticized version from fantasy games. Its lower half was that of a colossal, black widow spider, the bulbous abdomen covered in coarse, bristling hairs, standing on 8 razor-sharp legs. Where the spider's head should be, the torso of a sickly pale, multi-armed woman protruded. Her face was a horrific amalgamation of human features and mandibles, and her 6 black, soulless eyes were locked onto the goblin children with ravenous hunger. Appraisal result, Rogue Arachne. Rank B-. Highly territorial and predatory. Possesses steel thread webbing and potent neurotoxins. The Arachne hissed, a sound like tearing metal, and raised two of its front legs to skewer the children. No, Izuku didn't think, he just acted. He pushed off the edge of the ravine, diving down. Manchester. Smash! Izuku spun forward in midair, bringing his right leg down like an axe. He aimed perfectly, striking the ground between the Arachne and the goblin children. The impact sounded like a cannon firing. The earth shattered, throwing up a massive wall of dirt and stone that blinded the Arachne and knocked the massive monster back several feet. Izuku landed in a crouch, directly in front of the cowering children. The dust settled, revealing his small, glowing form. The emerald lightning arched off his body, illuminating the dark ravine. The goblin children gasped, their large eyes wide with awe and shock as they stared at the human boy radiating this terrifying, beautiful light. Are you all right? Izuku asked, not turning around, his eyes locked on the screeching monster recovering from the blast. He spoke in Japanese, but to his surprise, thanks to the world's inherent magical translation, the goblins understood him perfectly. Why yes. The oldest-looking boy stammered. But, the monster. Don't worry, Izuku said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its boyish innocence and adopting the firm, unyielding tone of a pro-hero. I'll keep you safe. The Arachne shrieked in fury at being denied its meal. Its human torso twisted, and it spat a volley of white, glistening projectiles. Analyst. Time slowed. Izuku's eyes tracked the projectiles. Appraisal, steel thread webbing. Highly adhesive, tensile strength equivalent to industrial steel wire. If I dodge, the webs will hit the kids behind me. I have to deflect or sever. Izuku shifted his stance, grounding his feet. He channeled his magicules into his hands. Shoot style wasn't just for legs, it was about rapid, precise martial arts. He brought his hands up in a flurry of knife hand strikes. St. Louis barrage! His hands moved as a blur of green light, the concentrated magicules acting as a blade. He chopped through the steel webbing midair, the hardened threads snapping under his magically enhanced strikes. The Arachne didn't pause. Seeing its webs fail, it charged, all 8 legs scuttling across the rocky terrain with terrifying speed. It lunged, 2 of its massive front legs stabbing down toward Izuku like spears. Izuku ducked the first leg, feeling the wind shear off the razor-sharp tip. He pivoted, grabbing the second leg with both hands. The Arachne was heavy, easily weighing a ton. But with his magicules reinforcing his muscles, Izuku didn't flinch. 20%, Izuku roared, his feet sinking into the stone. He spun, using the Arachne's own momentum against it. With a massive heave, he lifted the colossal monster off the ground and slammed it violently into the ravine wall. The cliff face cracked. The monster shrieked in pain, its abdomen oozing a foul-smelling yellow liquid. Izuku didn't let up. He knew from fighting Nomus that you didn't give monsters a chance to recover. He leaped off the ground, bounding off the cliff face to position himself directly above the dazed Arachne. He reared his right leg back, channeling the maximum amount of magicules he could safely control into his heel. The green aura concentrated into a blinding, singular point of light. Texas. Smash! He drove his heel directly into the center of the Arachne's human torso. The magical kinetic force exploded downward. The monster was driven straight through the rocky floor of the ravine, a massive crater forming around the point of impact. A localized shockwave rippled out, knocking the breath from the goblin children and sending dust billowing into the sky. Izuku flipped backward, landing lightly on his feet. He kept his stance ready, his eyes narrowed as the dust cleared. The Arachne lay twitching in the center of the crater. Its exoskeleton was shattered, and its monstrous life force was rapidly fading. Within moments, the body began to dissolve, breaking down into black particles of magicules that scattered into the wind, leaving nothing behind but a fist-sized, dark purple crystal. Appraisal, Magic Core, B rank. Izuku let out a long, heavy breath. Magicule cowling, deactivate, he whispered. The green lightning faded, and the overwhelming pressure in the ravine vanished. He turned around to face the goblin children. They were still huddled against the wall, but they weren't looking at him with fear anymore. They were looking at him with absolute, unadulterated reverence. Izuku's intense, battle-hardened expression melted away instantly, replaced by his usual awkward, gentle smile. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly feeling self-conscious in his rough tunic. Hi, Izuku said softly, walking over to them and crouching down to their eye level. It's gone now. Are any of you hurt? Did it bite anyone? The oldest goblin boy slowly shook his head. He reached out a trembling green hand, lightly touching the fabric of Izuku's pants, as if checking to see if he was real. You saved us. You defeated the many legs. What are you? Izuku smiled warmly. My name is Izuku Midoriya. And I'm just a passing, well, I guess you could call me a hero. High above the ravine, hidden perfectly within the dense canopy of a massive cedar tree, something was watching. It wasn't a monster of immense power, nor was it a heavily armored knight. It was a perfectly round, translucent pale blue slime. The slime rested on a thick branch, staring down at the scene below. Report. The target is an otherworlder. Species, human. Magical capacity is highly dense and localized. Threat level, substantial, but currently stable. The mechanical voice of the great sage echoed in the slime's mind. Yeah, no kidding, the slime thought to himself, his internal monologue sounding like a thoroughly exhausted Japanese salaryman. Did you see that kick? He just totally obliterated a B-rank monster with pure physical force. And that green lightning, what is this? An episode of some shonen anime. The slime, formerly known as Satoru Mikami and currently known as Rimuru Tempest, watched as the boy gently checked the goblin children for injuries, pulling a slightly crushed venom spike melon from his satchel and offering it to them with a bright, disarming smile. Izuku Midoriya, huh? Rimuru mused internally. That's a Japanese name if I've ever heard one. And calling himself a hero. Man, he looks like he's 14. What's a kid doing out here in the middle of a monster-infested forest? Rimuru had just left Veldora's cave a few days ago and was currently wandering the forest, getting a feel for his new slime body. He hadn't expected to run into a human, let alone one from his own world, pulling off superhero landings to save goblins. Well, he seems like a good kid, Rimuru decided, slightly bouncing on the branch. And if he's Japanese, maybe we can finally talk about something normal. I wonder if he knows how the final volume of my favorite manga ended? Wait, if he's only 14, maybe he's from a different era? Ugh, time travel isekai logic gives me a headache. Down below, Izuku finished handing out the fruit to the starving children. He stood up, wiping the dirt from his knees. Alright, Izuku said, looking around the darkening forest. It's not safe out here. Where is your village? I can escort you back so you don't get ambushed again. The goblin children pointed vaguely toward the south, their faces still etched with awe. Great. Let's go, Izuku said cheerfully. Up in the tree, Rimuru jiggled. Heading south? That's the direction I was going. Guess I'll tag along from the trees. If this kid is starting a quest line to save a goblin village, the least I can do is watch his back. Plus, I really want to know how he did that shiny green kick. With a silent squelch, the blue slime morphed slightly, dropping from the branch and stealthily swinging through the canopy using a thread of sticky webbing, following the green-haired boy and his new goblin companions into the depths of the Great Jura Forest. The Great Jura Forest was not a place that welcomed the weak. Izuku Midoriya had learned this quickly, yet, as he walked beneath the towering canopy, the heavy, magical dense air felt less like a threat and more like a weighted training vest. He was adapting. Behind him, a line of 5 small, green-skinned goblin children trailed closely. The oldest boy, whose round face and large nose gave him a perpetually surprised expression, stuck right to Izuku's heels. Izuku had learned his name was Gobta. Mr. Izuku, Gobta squeaked, his voice trembling slightly as he peered into the dark underbrush. Are you sure it's safe? The forest. It's usually full of scary things. Izuku paused, glancing over his shoulder with a soft, reassuring smile. He didn't have All Might's booming laugh or his towering, invincible physique. But he had inherited the symbol of peace's spirit. It's okay, Gobta, Izuku said, his tone steady and calm. I'm keeping an eye out. And if anything tries to hurt you, I'll protect you. I promise. He wasn't just offering empty comfort. Beneath his calm exterior, Izuku's analyst's skill was running a constant, low-level scan of their surroundings. His savior skill rested quietly in his chest, a passive radar attuned to any malicious intent directed at the children. So far, the forest was relatively quiet, save for one glaring anomaly. Izuku's brow furrowed slightly. There it is again. For the past 20 minutes, ever since they left the ravine where he had defeated the arachne, Izuku had sensed something following them. It wasn't triggering his savior skill, meaning whatever it was held no killing intent toward him or the goblins, but the sheer density of its magicules was staggering. It feels like a walking storm cloud, Izuku muttered internally, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive. The magicule concentration is incredibly high, far denser than the arachne. It's moving through the trees, mimicking our pace perfectly. A high-tier predator? No, predators emit a specific predatory aura. This feels curious. Almost casual. He stopped in a small clearing where the moonlight pierced through the leaves. Hold on a second, everyone. Stay behind me. The goblins instantly huddled together, terrified. Izuku turned around, facing the dense tree line. He didn't activate magicule cowling yet, not wanting to provoke whatever was out there, but he shifted his weight onto the balls of his feet, ready to move at a microsecond's notice. I know you're there, Izuku called out into the shadows, his voice firm. You've been following us since the ravine. I don't sense any hostility from you, but I'd prefer it if you showed yourself. Silence hung in the air for a long moment. Only the rustle of leaves could be heard. Then, a sudden squelch sounded from the branches above. A perfectly round, translucent, pale blue mass dropped from the canopy. It landed on a flat rock about 10 feet away from Izuku with a soft, bouncy plop. Izuku blinked. He broke his fighting stance, standing up straight. A water balloon. I am not a water balloon. A voice suddenly echoed, not in the air, but directly into Izuku's mind. It sounded like an exasperated young man. I'm a slime. A slime, thank you very much. Izuku jumped back, completely taken off guard. Whoa! Telepathy? Wait, a slime? But slimes are supposed to be low-level, semi-amorphous, non-sentient blobs of acidic cytoplasm. The magicule density radiating from you is completely disproportionate to your physical mass. How does your cellular structure maintain cohesion while processing high-level cognitive thought? Do you have a centralized nervous system, or is your entire body a single neural network fueled by magicules? And telepathy, are you translating intent into brainwaves, or directly vibrating the magicules in the air to simulate sound? The green-haired boy clamped a hand over his mouth, his eyes wide. He hadn't muttered like that out loud since his days at UA. On the rock, the blue slime seemed to deflate slightly, sweat dropping in a profoundly human-like manner. Wow. That's a lot of big words for a kid in a tunic. You're quite the overthinker, aren't you? Izuku flushed red, bowing apologetically. I am so sorry. It's a bad habit. I've never met a talking slime before. The slime bounced, puffing out its metaphorical chest. Well, you're looking at a special one. But don't worry. I'm not a bad slime. Izuku froze. His analytical mind, running at hyperspeed, instantly flagged the phrase, I'm not a bad slime. It was an impossibly specific sequence of words. It wasn't just a reassurance. It was a cultural touchstone. It was the iconic line from Dragon Quest, one of the most famous role-playing games in Japanese history. Izuku stared at the blue blob, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs for an entirely different reason than combat. Wait, did you just quote Dragon Quest? The slime physically jolted. If it had eyes, they would be wide as dinner plates. The telepathic voice that echoed back was filled with absolute, unadulterated shock. You know what Dragon Quest is. The heavy, magical air of the great Jura forest seemed to vanish, replaced by the sterile, nostalgic feeling of a Japanese living room. Of course I do, Izuku breathed out, taking a step forward. He switched from the world's auto-translated language directly to his native, unedited Japanese. Yuji Horíi's masterpiece, the grandfather of the JRPG genre. But how do you know that? Are you? The slime jiggled frantically, hopping off the rock and sliding over to Izuku. Japanese? You're speaking Japanese. Real, actual Japanese. Holy crap. A fellow countryman. The slime suddenly elongated, forming two crude little arms that waved in the air. Oh man, you have no idea how good it is to hear that. I've been stuck in this forest talking to a tsundere dragon, goblins, and wolves for months. I'm Satoru Mikami. Well, in my past life I was. Now I'm Rimuru Tempest. Nice to meet you. Izuku's eyes welled with tears. The profound, aching loneliness that he had shoved down into the depths of his heart suddenly bubbled to the surface. He wasn't the only one. He wasn't entirely cut off from his home. Izuku dropped to his knees in the dirt, completely ignoring the fact that he was bowing to a monster. He pressed his hands to his thighs in a formal, deeply respectful seated bow. I am Izuku Midoriya, from Mizudafu, Japan. It is an absolute honor to meet you, Mikami-san. I mean, Rimuru-san. Whoa, hey, no need for the formalities. Rimuru panicked, bouncing around Izuku to try and get him to stand up. We're in a fantasy world, man. Drop the san. Just Rimuru is fine. Izuku sat up, wiping his eyes with the back of his arm, a massive, genuine smile breaking across his face. Alright. Sorry, Rimuru. I died. I thought I was all alone here. Yeah, me too, Rimuru's voice softened with empathy. Got stabbed on the street trying to protect a junior coworker. Next thing I know, I'm blind, deaf, and eating grass in a cave. Ice-Sky reincarnation is a trip, huh? Stabbed? Izuku tilted his head. By a villain? A villain? Rimuru echoed, confused. No, just some random crazy guy with a knife. What do you mean, villain? You mean like a criminal? Well, yes, but a villain. A quirk user who uses their powers for crime, Izuku explained, equally confused. Wait. What year did you die, Rimuru? 2022. Why? Izuku's jaw dropped. 2000 and... Rimuru, I died in 21XX. Over a century after that, it was Rimuru's turn to be stunned. Hold on. You're from the future? Do we have flying cars? Did they ever finish Hunter x Hunter? I don't know about the manga, but society completely changed a few years after you died, Izuku explained, his muttering habit returning in full force. A glowing baby was born in Shinchin City. Humans started mutating. By my era, 80% of the global population possessed a superhuman ability called a quirk. Society became a battleground between heroes and villains. Superpowers? You guys got real-life superpowers? Rimuru bounced excitedly. Did you have one? Wait, is that how you destroyed that arachne? I saw that green lightning. Was that your quirk? Actually, no, Izuku smiled, looking at his hand. My quirk. I lost it when I died. The voice in this world gave me a unique skill to replace it, using magicules. The voice of the world, Rimuru nodded knowingly. Yeah, it hooked me up too. Gave me great sage and predator. Basically turned me into a living cheat code, Izuku chuckled. It was surreal. He was sitting in a magical forest, surrounded by goblin children who were watching this exchange with absolute bewilderment, chatting with a blue slime about Japanese history and superpowers. The crushing weight of his past life, the war, the death of all for one, it all felt a little lighter. He had found a kindred spirit. Well, Midoriya, Rimuru said, his tone turning warm and welcoming. You look like you're just wandering around. And protecting these little guys. Speaking of which. Rimuru turned toward the goblins. Hey Gobta. Long time no see, Gobta gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the slime. Lord Rimuru. You know this scary strong human? Yup. He's a friend from my hometown, Rimuru declared proudly. Midoriya. I've actually got a village not too far from here. It's mostly goblins and direwolves. We're currently trying to build it up. You want to come with us? You need a place to stay, right? Izuku's eyes widened. A village? A community. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude. I'm human, won't the monsters be afraid of me? Nah, they're good people, Rimuru assured him. Plus, after seeing you punt a B-rank monster into next week, I think they'd be more likely to worship you than fight you. Come on, I'll introduce you to everyone. Izuku looked at the goblin children, who were looking at him with hopeful eyes. He looked back at Rimuru. I'd love to. Thank you, Rimuru. The journey to the village took another hour. Along the way, Rimuru gave Izuku a crash course on his life in the cardinal world so far. Izuku listened intently, his analyst skill committing every detail to his mental notebooks. He learned about Veldora the Storm Dragon, the naming of monsters, and the evolution of the goblins into hobgoblins. So, by giving them a name, you imparted a portion of your own magicules to them, triggering an evolutionary leap, Izuku muttered, his eyes shining with scientific fascination. That's incredible. It's like a magical equivalent of forced genetic mutation, but symbiotic. It requires immense power to sustain. Yeah, I actually passed out for 3 days after I named the whole village, Rimuru admitted dryly. Note to self, don't hand out names like free candy. As they crested a small hill, the trees broke, revealing a massive clearing. Izuku stopped, taking in the sight. It was a village, but barely. Hundreds of muscular, green-skinned hobgoblins and beautiful, human-looking goblinas were scurrying about. Massive wolves with stars on their foreheads rested in the shade. The community was bustling with energy, but their living conditions were rough. They were living in crude, patchwork tents made of animal skins, and their attempts at building wooden structures were painfully slow. Several hobgoblins were struggling to chop down a single large tree with primitive stone axes. Welcome to Tempest. Well, the early alpha build of it, Rimuru said, bouncing slightly. It's a work in progress. A massive, incredibly muscular hobgoblin with a white beard came running toward them, followed by an enormous, two-horned wolf that looked like a creature out of a nightmare. Lord Rimuru! You have returned! The muscular goblin boomed, tears of joy streaming down his face. Hey Rigard, Rimuru greeted. And Ranga. I brought some guests. Rigard and Ranga abruptly stopped, their eyes locking onto Izuku. Ranga let out a low, rumbling growl, sensing the dense, suppressed power residing within the small human boy. Rigard stepped in front of Rimuru protectively. Lord Rimuru, a human? Here? Rigard asked warily. Is he a threat? Izuku didn't wait for Rimuru to defend him. He stepped forward, placed his hands sharply at his sides, and bowed at a perfect 90-degree angle. Hello? I am Izuku Midoriya. Izuku announced clearly. I am a friend of Rimuru's from our homeland. He graciously invited me to your village. I promise I mean no harm to you or your people, and I am incredibly grateful for your hospitality. Rigard blinked, completely thrown off guard. Humans, especially those radiating such intense magical energy, were usually arrogant, terrifying invaders. This boy was bowing to him like a humble merchant. Ranga stopped growling, his tail giving a confused, tentative wag. It's okay, guys. Midoriya saved Gobta and the kids from an arachne, Rimuru explained. Instantly, the tension vanished. Rigard's face broke into a massive, booming smile. He saved our children? Then he is no mere human, he is an honored guest. Welcome, Sir Midoriya. Just Izuku is fine, really. Izuku waved his hands frantically, blushing. As Rimuru was swarmed by the adoring villagers, Izuku walked through the camp. His eyes scanned the hobgoblins hacking away at the timber. They were strong, but their tools were inefficient, and the magicule-infused wood of the Jura forest was notoriously dense. Izuku remembered his time at UA. He remembered the cultural festivals, the training camps, the sense of community. Looking at these monsters, he didn't see beasts. He saw people trying to build a home. He walked back over to Rimuru, who was resting on Ranga's back. Hey Rimuru? Izuku asked gently. Do you guys need help with the construction? Help? Rimuru looked at him. Well, yeah, we're severely lacking in manpower and good tools. The dwarves are helping make tools, but gathering lumber is taking forever. But you're our guest, Midoriya. You don't have to work, Izuku grinned. He reached up, unlacing the front of his rough tunic and pulling it over his head, leaving him in a tight, sleeveless black undershirt. His heavily muscled, perfectly unscarred arms caught the attention of several nearby goblinas, who suddenly started whispering among themselves. Rimuru, Izuku said, rolling his shoulders. Where I'm from, A hero doesn't just fight villains. A hero helps their community. Point me to the trees. Rimuru's sweat dropped. Okay. Rigurd, show him the logging area. Rigurd led Izuku to the edge of the forest, where a dozen hobgoblins were sweating profusely, trying to fell a tree the width of a small car. Sir Izuku, this is our logging sector, Rigurd rumbled. But I must warn you, Jura wood is as hard as iron. Without proper axes. Understood, Izuku nodded. He stretched his legs, taking a deep breath. He closed his eyes and looked inward. I need precision, speed, and raw kinetic force. Let's push it. Magicule cowling, Izuku whispered. 20%. Crack KOM. A shockwave of air erupted from Izuku, kicking up a cloud of dust. The hobgoblins shouted in shock, throwing their arms over their faces. When the dust cleared, the human boy was enveloped in a roaring aura of brilliant green lightning. The magicules were so dense they audibly cracked like thunder. Izuku's eyes glowed with an ethereal, verdant light. Alert. The otherworlder Izuku Midoriya has drastically increased his magicule circulation. Kinetic output has increased by 400%. Great Sage informed Rimuru, who had trotted over to watch. He's doing the anime power-up thing again. Rimuru panicked internally. Izuku dashed forward. He didn't use an axe. He vaulted into the air, spinning like a top. St. Louis. Chop. Izuku swung his leg in a devastating roundhouse kick. His heel, reinforced by 20% of his stockpiled magicules, slammed into the base of the massive ironwood tree. The sound was like a bomb going off. The trunk didn't just splinter. It was cleanly sheared through by the sheer kinetic force of the magically enhanced strike. The massive tree groaned, tilted, and began to fall. Before it even hit the ground, Izuku was already moving. He darted around the falling trunk, his hands moving in a blur as he used precise, magicule-infused karate chops to perfectly shear off the massive branches, stripping the tree clean in a matter of seconds. The tree hit the ground with a massive thud. It was a perfectly clean, delimbed log. The hobgoblins stood completely frozen, their jaws literally hanging open. Izuku didn't stop. He turned to the next tree. Kick. Strip. Fall. Over and over again. He moved through the tree line like a green hurricane. Within 5 minutes he had felled, stripped, and perfectly stacked 20 massive trees, a job that would have taken the village a week. All right. Izuku called out, his aura fading. He wasn't even out of breath. He jogged over to the massive pile of logs. He grabbed 10 of them, weighing several tons combined, and hoisted them onto his shoulders as if they were made of styrofoam. He walked past the stunned Rigurd. Where do you want these, Rigurd-san? Rigurd slowly pointed a trembling finger toward the center of the camp. Be by the central fire pit. Got it. Plus ultra. Izuku cheered, jogging off with a mountain of wood on his back. Rimuru sat beside Rigurd, the slime jiggling slightly in pure disbelief. Great Sage, Rimuru thought numbly. Is he human? Answer, biologically yes. However, his physical application of magicules defies standard natural laws of the cardinal world. His combat style treats magical energy strictly as brute kinetic force. He's a gorilla, Rimuru muttered. A superpowered, incredibly polite, green-haired gorilla. That night, the village threw a feast. A massive bonfire roared in the center of the camp, fueled by the wood Izuku had gathered. The hobgoblins roasted massive boars on spits, passing around crude wooden mugs of water and berry juice. The atmosphere was loud, chaotic, and incredibly warm. Izuku sat on a large log near the fire, a massive chunk of roasted meat in his hand. He was currently surrounded by a crowd of goblin children, including Gobta, who were begging him to show them the green lightning again. Only a little bit, Izuku laughed, holding up a finger and letting a tiny spark of green magicule energy arc across his fingertip, causing the children to ooh and ah. Rimuru sat on the log right beside him, holding a skewer of meat inside his slime body to digest it. You're quite a hit, Midoriya, Rimuru noted telepathically, watching the scene. They love you. They're good kids, Izuku smiled softly, watching Gobta try to mimic his kick and fall flat on his face. He looked around the fire. He saw Rigurd laughing boisterously with his sons. He saw the goblinas serving food with bright smiles. He looked at Rimuru, a fellow soul from Japan who had built this sanctuary. It reminded him of the UA Heights Alliance dorms. The noise, the laughter, the feeling of absolute safety amongst friends. For the last year of his life, Izuku had been a ghost. He had abandoned his friends to protect them, wandering the ruined streets of Japan alone, covered in blood and ash, carrying the burden of the world on his shoulders. He had forgotten what it felt like to just sit by a fire and belong somewhere. "Hey, Rimuru?" Izuku asked quietly. "Yeah, thank you for inviting me here," Izuku said, turning his emerald eyes toward the slime. "I know I don't belong in this world. I know I'm an outsider. But, sitting here, it's the first time in a very, very long time that I've felt at peace." Rimuru stopped bouncing. The slime stretched slightly, leaning against Izuku's leg in a comforting gesture. "You're not an outsider, Izuku," Rimuru said softly, dropping his last name. "You're from Japan, just like me. We otherworlders have to stick together. As long as I'm around, you've got a home in Tempest." Izuku felt a lump form in his throat. He nodded, taking a bite of his meat to hide his trembling smile. He didn't know what the future held. He knew from his mental notes that this world had demon lords, evil empires, and unfathomable dangers, but as he looked at the blue slime and the cheering monsters, he made a silent vow. He had given his life to save his old world. He would use his second chance to protect this one. The Emerald Hero had found his new home, and he would defend it with everything he had. The sun rose over the great Jura forest, casting a warm, golden hue over the rapidly expanding clearing of Tempest. What had been a disorganized smattering of animal skin tents just a month ago was now beginning to resemble a true settlement. Wooden cabins with sturdy roofs lined neatly paved dirt roads. The rhythmic clanging of hammers and the buzz of saws filled the morning air. Izuku Midoriya sat on the roof of the newly constructed meeting hall, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. His rough tunic was tied around his waist, exposing his unscarred, heavily muscled torso to the cool morning breeze. He had just finished laying the heavy timber rafters, a job that would have taken 20 hobgoblins all day, completed in under an hour thanks to a steady application of magicule cowling at 8%. He took a deep breath, letting the heavy, magicule-rich air fill his lungs. He was getting used to the atmospheric density of this world. It didn't feel like breathing through a wet cloth anymore. It felt invigorating, like standing in front of a powerful fan. "Good work up there, Midoriya," Rimuru's telepathic voice chimed in. Izuku looked down to see the blue slime bouncing along the dirt road, accompanied by a stout, muscular dwarf with a thick beard. "Kaijin." Izuku effortlessly backflipped off the two-story roof, landing on the dirt with a soft, shock-absorbing crouch that didn't kick up a single speck of dust. He stood up, offering a bright smile. "Morning, Rimuru." "Morning, Kaijin-san." "The roof is fully secured. I used a modified interlocking joint system for the main beams, so it should withstand even severe weather." Kaijin let out a booming laugh, slapping Izuku on the back hard enough to stagger a normal man. "Wahaha! Kid, I swear you've got the mind of a master architect and the strength of an earth dragon. If you ever want to leave this slime's side, there's a place for you in the dwarven forges." "I appreciate the offer, Kaijin-san, but I think I'll stay here," Izuku replied, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. "Speaking of staying here," Rimuru said, morphing into his human form, a beautiful, silver-haired, androgynous youth that Izuku knew was modeled after Shizu, the hero whose dying regrets Rimuru had consumed. "We need to have a serious talk about the state of the neighborhood. Come inside." Izuku's smile faded, replaced by the serious, focused expression of a pro-hero receiving a briefing. He followed Rimuru and Kaijin into the meeting hall. Inside, a large, round wooden table dominated the room. Seated around it were Rigurd, currently looking incredibly stoic, and a few of the newly arrived residents of Tempest, the Kijin. Just a week ago, a group of ogres had attacked Rimuru, mistaking him for the one who had slaughtered their village. After a brief misunderstanding, Rimuru had taken them in, named them, and triggered their evolution into Kijin. Izuku had been fascinated by them. Benimaru, the fiery-haired prince, Shuna, the gentle princess, Cheyenne, the fiercely loyal, if slightly unhinged, warrior, Sui, the silent shadow, Kurobe, the master smith, and Hakuru, the elderly sword master. Izuku took a seat between Rimuru and Benimaru. All right, Rimuru began, his tone uncharacteristically grave. So you got back from his scouting mission last night. The orc army isn't just a rumor. They are moving, and their numbers are terrifying. We're looking at a force of at least 200,000. Izuku stiffened. 200,000? The scale was unfathomable. The Paranormal Liberation Front had numbered around 100,000, and that had nearly brought the entirety of Japan to its knees. What's their objective? Izuku asked, his analyst skill already pulling up maps of the forest in his mind, calculating troop movements and logistics based on the geography Rimuru had shared with him. An army that size needs an astronomical amount of food and water to sustain a march. Are they heading for a specific strategic point, or are they just pillaging? Benimaru clenched his fists, his red eyes burning with a mixture of grief and hatred. They are a swarm of locusts. They don't conquer, they consume. They devoured my village. They ate my people, Izuku, to the last child. Izuku felt the blood drain from his face. Ate them? This is the law of the Jura forest, young Midoriya, Hakura said softly, his single open eye resting on the green-haired boy. The strong consume the weak. It is how monsters evolve. The orcs are likely being driven by an orc lord, a unique monster that possesses the skill-starved. It drives them mad with hunger, allowing them to assimilate the strength of whatever they eat. Izuku felt a wave of profound nausea wash over him. In his world, villains killed for ideology, for power, or out of twisted trauma. But this was organized, biological genocide. Then we have to stop them, Izuku said firmly, his hands planting flat on the wooden table. If we know they're moving, and we know they're slaughtering innocent villages, we have to intercept them. We can coordinate with the local lizardmen tribes, form a choke point at the marshes, and... Midoriya, hold on, Rimuru interrupted, holding up a hand. We aren't a global police force. We're a single village trying to survive. Taking on 200,000 orcs is suicide. We don't have the jurisdiction to fight a war. Jurisdiction? Izuku stared at Rimuru. Rimuru, people are dying. You saw what they did to Benimaru's village. We have power. You have incredible power, and I can fight. If we just sit here and fortify our own walls while thousands of others are eaten alive, how can we call ourselves heroes? The room fell dead silent. The monster stared at the human boy. His emerald eyes were burning with a fierce, blinding light, a moral absolute that was completely alien to them. Izuku, Shuna spoke up gently, her voice like chimes. What is a hero to you? Izuku blinked. A hero is someone who saves people. Someone who risks their own life to protect those who can't protect themselves. It's the right thing to do, Kaijin sighed, a heavy, weary sound. Kid, you're looking at this world through the lens of a fairy tale. Out here, a hero is a title given by the church or a physical evolution recognized by the voice of the world. It's usually a human who slaughters monsters. Us. Izuku flinched. There are no police here, Midoriya, Rimuru said softly, switching to Japanese so only Izuku would fully grasp the nuance. There is no Hero Public Safety Commission. There are no courts. There are demon lords who can wipe out a country because they got bored. There are angels that purge civilizations that advance too fast. The rule of law here is entirely dependent on how much magical power you can output. Rimuru switched back to the common tongue. If we march against the orcs, we aren't doing it to uphold the law. We'd be doing it for survival. And if we fight them, it won't be like the comic books, Izuku. We won't be tying them up for the police. We will have to kill them. Thousands of them. Izuku stared down at the grain of the wooden table. His hands slowly curled into fists. His entire life, his entire existence, was built on the foundation of All Might's ideals. You defeat the villain, you save the hostage, and you hand the bad guy over to the authorities. Even in the final war, even against Tamura Shigaraki, Izuku had sacrificed his own life to avoid outright murdering Tenko Shimura. He had sought salvation, but Rimuru was right. There was no Tartarus here. If he punched an Orc Lord into submission and walked away, the Orc Lord would just wake up and eat the next village. To save lives in the cardinal world, he would have to take them. The realization clashed violently with his deeply ingrained MHA ethics. His savior skill thrummed in his chest, a constant reminder of his desire to protect. But how could he protect without staining his hands in blood? I need some air, Izuku whispered, standing up abruptly. He didn't look at anyone as he walked out of the meeting hall, his footsteps silent on the wooden floor. An hour later, Izuku was in the training grounds on the outskirts of the village. He was moving, trying to outrun his own thoughts. Green lightning cracked the air as he pivoted, launching a barrage of shoot-style kicks against a massive, reinforced ironwood dummy Kaijin had built for him. Smash! 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 Each impact echoed like a thunderclap. The wood splintered and groaned, but held. Your power is magnificent, a calm, raspy voice noted. But your spirit is entirely absent. You fight like a beast with a cannon strapped to its back. Powerful, but deafeningly loud and incredibly predictable. Izuku stopped, panting slightly, the green aura fading. He turned to see Hakuru standing a few feet away, holding a simple wooden bakken, practice sword. The elderly Kijin's single eye was focused on Izuku, analyzing him with a gaze sharper than any blade. Hakuru-san, Izuku bowed respectfully. You are troubled, young Izuku, Hakuru said, stepping onto the dirt field. Lord Rimura's words have shaken your foundation. I just don't want to become a killer, Izuku admitted, looking at his hands. In my world, a hero who kills loses the moral high ground. We were supposed to be better than the villains. A noble sentiment for a peaceful world, Hakuru nodded slowly. But tell me, Izuku, if a rabid wolf is attacking a child, and you possess the strength to stop it, do you gently push the wolf away, knowing it will simply return tomorrow to finish the job? Or do you put the beast down to ensure the child sees tomorrow? Izuku gritted his teeth. I've faced rabid wolves before. I always found a third option. The hubris of overwhelming power, Hakuru smiled thinly. You believe your strength allows you the luxury of choice. Let us test that theory. Spar with me. Izuku blinked in surprise. Spar? Hakuru-san, I don't use weapons. And my magical output. I don't want to hurt you. Hakuru chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. He tossed a second wooden sword to Izuku. Izuku caught it clumsily. You need not worry about my safety, boy. Do not hold back. Come at me with the intent to end my life, or you will find yours quickly forfeit. Izuku hesitated. But he needed an outlet. He needed to focus. He gripped the wooden sword awkwardly. He didn't know the first thing about kendo, but he knew how to move his body. Magical cowling, 8%. The emerald aura flared to life. Izuku didn't wait. He dashed forward, crossing the distance in a fraction of a second. He swung the wooden sword like a baseball bat, aiming for Hakuru's side. The sheer kinetic force behind the swing created a localized vacuum, howling through the air. It's too fast for him to dodge, Izuku thought, fully intending to stop the blade a millimeter from Hakuru's ribs. He never got the chance. Hakuru didn't block. He didn't dodge. He simply shifted his weight half an inch. Izuku's overpowering swing caught nothing but air. The sudden lack of resistance threw Izuku completely off balance. Before Izuku could correct his posture, Hakuru's wooden blade tapped him lightly on the inside of his knee, collapsing his leg. A millisecond later, the tip of Hakuru's sword was resting gently against Izuku's jugular. Izuku froze, his eyes wide. He hadn't even seen the old man move. Dead, Hakuru stated flatly. How? Izuku gasped, jumping back and resetting his stance. My speed was drastically higher than yours. Speed is irrelevant if your opponent knows exactly where you will be before you even move, Hakuru said, lowering his blade into a relaxed, almost lazy stance. You telegraph your intent, Izuku. You gather your magicules, you tense your muscles, and you broadcast your desire to strike like a beacon. You rely purely on your physical attributes. I've trained in martial arts. Izuku argued defensively. I developed my own style. You developed a method of delivering explosions, Hakuru corrected gently. That is not martial arts. That is artillery. Again, Izuku gritted his teeth. He activated Analyst. Time slowed. He watched Hakuru's stance, analyzing the center of gravity, muscle tension, and foot placement. I won't swing wildly this time. I'll use my footwork. Izuku lunged again. He feinted a strike high, twisting his body to deliver a devastating shoot-style kick to Hakuru's legs. Hakuru's wooden sword blurred. It didn't strike Izuku's leg. It struck the empty space right above Izuku's leg, precisely where the dense concentration of Izuku's magicules was flowing. Smack! The impact was light, but it sent a shockwave of disruption through Izuku's aura. His magicule cowling sputtered and violently dispersed. Izuku lost his magical reinforcement mid-kick, tumbling into the dirt in an ungraceful heap. What was that? Izuku groaned, spitting out a mouthful of dust. You disrupted my magicules? I struck your ki, Hakuru corrected, offering a hand to help Izuku up. In this world, magicules are the fuel, but ki, your spiritual energy, is the engine. You are drawing raw magicules from your unique skill and forcing them through your body like water through a fire hose. It is incredibly inefficient. Izuku dusted himself off, his analytical mind captivated. So, ki is the manipulation of the flow? It is the synchronization of mind, body, and spirit, Hakuru explained, demonstrating by slowly swinging his wooden sword. As he moved, a faint, imperceptible aura coated the blade, not a roaring fire like Izuku's, but a calm, razor-thin stream of water. This is what we call an art. Magic relies on chanting and external phenomena. Arts rely on internal mastery. A master of arts can cut a mountain with a mundane steel blade, not by exploding magicules against it, but by severing the mountain's very presence. Izuku stared at the old Kijin. He suddenly realized how arrogant he had been. He thought he had mastered his new power because he could recreate one for all. But he was essentially using a jet engine as a club. Hakuru-san, Izuku bowed deeply, pressing his forehead toward the dirt. Please. Teach me. I don't want to just be a weapon. I want to be a warrior. Hakuru smiled, a genuine expression of warmth reaching his eye. Very well, young Izuku. We shall begin by stripping away your reliance on your explosions. From this day forward, until I say otherwise, you are forbidden from releasing your magicules externally. You must learn to contain the storm within. For the next 2 weeks, Izuku's life was a grueling cycle of physical labor and martial arts training. He didn't spar with Hakuru again. Instead, Hakuru made him perform forms, katas, slowly. Excruciatingly slowly. At first, Izuku hated it. His body was used to moving at Mach speeds, his mind processing combat in milliseconds. Moving slowly felt like trying to run underwater. But under Hakuru's relentless guidance, Izuku began to understand. He used analyst not to study Hakuru, but to study himself. He mapped the internal flow of his magicules. He noticed that when he prepared for a smash, he was unconsciously gathering all his energy into one limb, leaving the rest of his body vulnerable and screaming his intentions to anyone who could sense ki. Contain the storm, Izuku thought, standing in the center of the training field, his eyes closed. He activated stockpile. He drew the energy up, but instead of letting it flare out into the roaring green lightning of magicule cowling, he forced it inward. He commanded the magicules to seep into his muscle fibers, his bones, his very cells. It was agonizing. The pressure inside him built up exponentially. His skin felt like it was burning, but not a single spark of green light escaped his body. Control the breath. Do not let the energy rule you. You rule it. Hakuru's voice guided him from the sidelines. Izuku exhaled slowly. He visualized the energy not as a raging river, but as a deep, perfectly calm ocean. He let the pressure equalize. When he opened his eyes, they were no longer just green, they glowed with a profound, internalized luminescence. His skin didn't arc with lightning, but it possessed a subtle, unbreakable density. Internal cowling, Izuku dubbed it. He stepped forward, executing a standard thrust with his wooden sword. There was no sonic boom, no shockwave. But as the wooden tip pierced the air, the sheer, compressed ki behind the strike caused a perfect, circular vacuum ring to expand from the blade. Hakuru nodded approvingly. Better. You are no longer shouting. You are speaking clearly. Now you must learn to integrate your own style into this discipline. Izuku dropped the wooden sword. Hakuru-san, I am grateful for the sword training, but my style relies on my own body. My legs, my arms? I want to adapt this to close-quarters combat. Hakuru stroked his beard. I suspected as much. An empty-handed art is rare, but not unheard of. Very well. Show me your shoot style, but apply the silence of the water. Izuku spent the next week modifying his entire fighting style. He stopped relying on massive, sweeping kicks that left him open. He integrated Hakuru's parries and fluid footwork into his brawling. He learned to strike not just with the surface of his foot, but to project his ki inches past his physical strike, creating devastating internal damage to whatever he hit. He was evolving from a brawler into a martial artist. From a boy with a borrowed quirk to a warrior of the cardinal world. One evening, as Izuku was washing up by the river, Suya appeared from the shadows, hanging upside down from a tree branch. Midoriya, the silent Kijin said, his face expressionless. Lord Rimuru requests your presence at the forge. Izuku dried his face, thanking Suya before jogging toward the center of the village. The forge was Kurobe and Kaijin's domain, a massive open-air structure filled with the roaring heat of magical furnaces. When Izuku arrived, Rimuru was there in his slime form, resting on a workbench. Next to him stood Shuna, holding a large, carefully folded bundle of fabric, and Kurobe, who was grinning toothily while polishing a pair of imposing, dark metal gauntlets. Izuku! Shuna beamed, her eyes sparkling. We're so glad you're here. We have something for you. For me? Izuku asked, walking in. The heat of the forge washed over him, smelling of ozone and molten iron. You've been running around in the same rough-spun tunic for a month, Izuku, Rimuru said. You're a hero, right? Heroes need costumes. Plus, we're going to war soon. You need proper armor. Shuna stepped forward, presenting the bundle. Lord Rimuru described the garments from your homeland. I took the liberty of designing something that honors your past, while utilizing the materials of our world. Izuku reached out with trembling hands, taking the bundle. As the fabric unrolled, his breath hitched. It was a hero costume. It heavily resembled his final suit from Yue, the Zeta suit. But it was distinctly fantasy. The base bodysuit was made of an incredibly tough, flexible material woven from the silk of the arachne he had killed, dyed a deep, dark emerald green. Over the chest, shoulders, and thighs, segmented armor plating made of a lightweight, matte black magisteel was integrated seamlessly into the fabric. The armor is forged with your specific combat style in mind, Kurobe explained proudly, pointing to the pieces. It won't restrict your acrobatics. The bracers, Kurobe held up the gauntlets, are heavily reinforced magisteel. They possess a unique micro-rune structure. If you channel your magicules into them, they will compress the energy, allowing you to fire those wind blasts of yours without tearing your own skin. Air Force gauntlets, Izuku realized, his eyes widening. He recreated the Air Force gauntlets using runes. And the boots, Kaijin chimed in from the back, holding up a pair of heavy, iron-soled boots that looked identical to Izuku's iconic red shoes, but forged from dark red magisteel. Shock-absorbing cores. You could kick a mountain with those and not feel a tickle in your toes. Finally, Shuna held up the crowning piece. It wasn't the tattered yellow cape of Gran Torino. It was a long, durable scarf, woven from the brilliant, starlit fur of the direwolves, dyed a vibrant, striking gold. A hero needs a cape, right? Shuna smiled softly. Izuku stared at the gear. He traced the green fabric, the black armor, the golden scarf. It was a physical manifestation of his journey. It was a bridge between the boy who had died saving Japan, and the warrior who had been reborn in the Jura forest. Tears pricked his eyes. He didn't try to hide them. Izuku choked up, looking at Rimuru, Shuna, Kurobe, and Kaijin. I don't know what to say. It's perfect. Thank you? Thank you all so much. Go try it on, hero, Rimuru encouraged gently. Izuku retreated behind a changing screen. A few minutes later he stepped out. The suit fit perfectly. It clung to his muscles, providing a sense of security and weight he hadn't realized he was missing. The magisteel bracers locked onto his forearms with a satisfying click. He wrapped the golden scarf around his neck, letting the ends drape over his shoulders. He didn't have a cowl with rabbit ears anymore. He didn't need one to hide his face. He stood tall, his unscarred face set with a newfound determination. How does it feel? Kurobe asked. Izuku clenched his fists, feeling the micro-runes in the bracers resonate with the latent magicules in his body. He didn't feel like a weapon anymore. He felt like a shield. It feels right, Izuku said softly. He looked at Rimuru. The slime jiggled approvingly. Rimuru, Izuku said, his voice steady and resolute. Earlier, you asked me how I could call myself a hero in a world where survival requires killing. I've thought about it a lot. Rimuru tilted slightly, listening. I can't uphold the laws of a world that doesn't exist anymore, Izuku said, his emerald eyes locking onto the slime. I accept that in this world some monsters, some people, can't be reasoned with. If the orcs threaten this village, if they threaten innocent lives, I will fight them. I will strike them down. He took a step forward, the golden scarf swaying slightly in the heat of the forge. But I will never lose my humanity, Izuku vowed, his voice echoing with absolute conviction. I will never enjoy the kill. I will carry the weight of every life I take, so that others don't have to. I'm not here to be a judge or an executioner. I am here to be a shield. That is what a hero is. Rimuru looked at the green-haired boy in his new armor. He didn't see a naive child anymore. He saw a warrior who had accepted the brutal reality of the cardinal world, but refused to let it taint his soul. Well said, Izuku, Rimuru replied, a smile evident in his telepathic voice. Then, as the leader of this village, I officially welcome you to the vanguard. We have a war to win. Izuku nodded, his fists tightening in his magisteel gauntlets. He was ready. Let the orc disaster come. See.